initially, you'll have someone coming in and they are the first person that's from, I'm just going to say a random country, like from Brazil or from Taiwan. And that's obviously cool, but at first it's like, okay, different language, different behavior, etc., etc. And at first I would say there's like a dip in productivity where you don't understand each other as much. But then when you work through that and you improve your communication, I would say that the communication gets even better than if you would have just started and already would have been on the same communication level, because then you don't need to worry about it.
This episode is brought to you by WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. WHU is reshaping the way students learn about business, management, finance, and entrepreneurship through its innovative programs and partnerships in Germany and across the globe. To learn more about this globally ranked university, visit whu.edu today.
Hi folks, welcome back to the Most Awesome Founder podcast. In this episode, we have a fascinating conversation lined up with Justus Schmueser, WHU alumnus and co-founder of Kadmos, a salary payment platform for migrant workers, which was recognized by Glassdoor as one of the fastest growing startups in Germany in 2022. In this episode, we will discuss how his experience as a consultant helped him to develop the skills and mindset needed to become a successful founder. One of the unique aspects of Kadmos is their belief in the advantages of on-site working. In a world where remote work is becoming increasingly popular, Kadmos has taken a different approach, and we will explore why they believe this is the best way forward for their business. So whether you're an aspiring founder looking for inspiration or just curious about the inner workings of a successful startup, you don't want to miss this episode. Let's dive in.
Coming to you from WHU on the banks of the Rhine River in beautiful Vallendar, Germany. This is the best and most awesome founder podcast. A show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors, and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today.
Justus, welcome to the Most Awesome Founder podcast.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. It's great to have you here. And as always, we always start a bit with looking a bit at the background of the people that we interview in this podcast. And of course, to prepare, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, where I saw that you did your bachelor at WHU, but subsequently you actually did a master in finance at MIT in Boston. And of course, as a WHU professor, I'm always interested in knowing, like, was that a big change? Did you really have to adjust going to MIT? Can you remember how that felt, going from Vallendar to Boston?
Yeah, no, I can absolutely remember. I think academically, to be honest, it wasn't harder. It actually at times was easier. I think the exams and workload actually were more at WHU, to be honest. Like that was easier.
Okay.
What was really cool though, and I think that was also the biggest thing that I took away was the much higher diversity of the people, right? I think the awesome thing about WHU is that you have such a concentration of people that are aspiring to relatively similar things, especially from their career. And at MIT, it was people were still very ambitious, but there was very different types of ambition and very different people. Also, I mean, today, I guess one of the most relevant thing we're going to talk about is our company, Kadmos, and actually my co-founder Sasha, I met him studying there, and I think things would have turned out very differently if I wouldn't have met him there, and if it wouldn't have been such a diverse group of people.
Okay, and can you maybe explain a bit more what you see as the kind of added value of that kind of diversity? Because of course it's a big topic, and also at WHU we are now really investing in trying to get more diverse students, more international students, and that's steadily working out. So we also see it as important, but can you maybe describe how you saw that as a very specific advantage of having a more diverse group of students?
Sure. And maybe to preface that, it's not only I think about how many males and females, where do people come from? I mean, that also obviously influences it, but also the skills that people have and what they do. So the one example that always comes to my mind is sharing a lot of time with these very quant-driven people, right? And you had people that we would play poker in our dorm room, And then this one guy, Nick, greetings if you ever watches this. He would just start calculating odds in his head while new cards, came out over the course of the game. And like that in a really precise manner, right? Like I might be exaggerating, but something like, oh, the odds just went to 1 to 200,000 against me to only 1 to 127. And that was really impressive because seeing that live tells you, oh, there's actually someone who is able to calculate that in his head and knows how to do it. And then suddenly, I realized I don't know how to do that, and that shows you, oh, there's maybe a path here of things I can learn which I don't know about. So I think that's maybe a good example of how that felt.
Yeah, and for me, it's intriguing that you touch upon this topic of diversity, because after your master in MIT, you went to McKinsey, and as an outsider, I would see McKinsey not as the kind of core example of diversity.
It's not. No, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, to be honest, I think actually once you're inside, there's also a bunch of diversity in terms of people's study background and all these things. But to be honest, McKinsey wasn't a really inspired choice at that moment in time. Rather, I wanted to work there since I was 15. When I was 15, I met a guy that was a senior partner at the firm, and he told me about, by the way, tomorrow Sunday, I need to fly to South Africa and rescue a diamond mine. And I was like, okay, what kind of job do I get to fly to South Africa on Monday and rescue a diamond mine? That's the job I want to do. And that was the first time I heard about McKinsey, and obviously I researched it a bit more what that even meant. But like from 15 to like 22, when I started working there, that was like my singular career goal. Like there was no other. I also only applied at McKinsey. I didn't apply at any other institute. I did anything else. Like I only wanted to work there. I prepared, and I just wanted to do that. And there was no discussion for me regarding that topic.
Okay, so that was a very focused kind of career path that you had in your mind from your 15 years already. Okay.
Pretty much. And I mean, it sounds maybe too nerdy, right? I mean, it wasn't like that was the singular purpose of my life. But when someone asked me, excuse me, what do you want to do for your career? I was like, yeah, I think that's what I want to do.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And you're not the only one that does that kind of career path. We look quite intensively to the career paths of founders from WHU, and I would say this is almost like the prototypical career path, first going to a big consulting company and then later on start your own company. Can you maybe explain me a bit what you see as the kind of advantage of having this kind of 2-3 years at a consulting gig? How does it help you as a founder?
I think mainly in 2 ways it helped me. If I was completely brainwashed from McKinsey, I would have said 3 ways, but I'm gonna stick to the 2 ways. One, I think it really helps you develop yourself as a, I would call it worker, right? Like the toolkit and the mindset and so many other things that you get as an individual, thinking about how do I work in like a capitalist enterprise, like that you really learn. Because the people that are above you have done this for so many years so intensively. You do it so much. Like there's very little time throughout the day where you have downtime, or at night, or whenever. Right, you're always working, and people are always pushing you to do the next important thing. So you really learn extremely quickly. But in the specific domain of like how do you work in an enterprise? And I think the second thing is the ability to see a lot of different industries and companies. Shows you to some extent what's good or bad, and also because you see different teams, right? You work with different project managers, different partners, different other associates. You work with different clients, and that helped you, or at least helped me, to calibrate kind of what is good or bad in terms of work. And that was also one of the drivers to then start doing something else, because I saw what kind of environments I like to work in, and then I was able to think about, okay, what kind of environment can I create that I want to work in? So those 2 things, yeah.
Would you actually recommend today students to still follow this trajectory? So first go to consulting, and then to, if they have the ambition to create a startup, would you still encourage them first do 2-3 years consulting and then start? Or would you say, no, just start immediately or do something else? I don't know.
It's a good question. I haven't tried the other ways. I only know this way.
Yeah.
And also often for the people working directly with me, I look for a somewhat similar mindset, this idea of like a professional services mindset. So I think consulting it doesn't have to be consulting. It can be like investment banking, or it can be a law firm, or it could be like a private equity fund or anything else, I think, where you work on topics that are always kind of super high priority for the people you work with. The topic where you work in really focused teams. It's topics where it's kind of project based and you have to do something quickly. You have to get something done. There's a lot of pressure involved. I would encourage people to do anything like that in the beginning. I think if you go to a large industrial, I mean, I don't know. Again, I haven't done it. I can't. But what I see from the outside, it sounds like there's a lot of downtime, a lot of kind of maybe boredom, a lot of situations where you don't know what you are supposed to do and how you can add value. And the thing now that I really take from that, I mentioned at this first point of self-development, how do you work? It's like, when I do work now, no one cares if if I work. Like, there's no one checking, am I in the office? No one's going to promote me. I cannot be promoted or anything like that. So the only question I ask myself is, am I right now creating value for the goals that I have when I'm working? And if I realize I'm not, like, I close my laptop and I go somewhere else. I do something else, but I don't stand there and like, oh, I just exist as a worker bee in this cubicle. And that mindset, I think you will learn from this professional services, where you really realize what does it mean to be constantly kind of creating productive output.
Yeah, so
it's a kind of one last caveat, and then I'll stop talking. This is also glorifying it a bit, right? I mean, I'm happy to spend also the same amount of time talking about the downside of it, but I think when you talk about like wanting to like achieve things in your career and like an enterprise, I think that I think really helps.
Yeah, no, and I ask because for me, and again, I've always worked in the academic world, so what do I know? But at least as an outsider, the world of consulting and the world of startups seem to be so two different worlds that for me, it's always a bit kind of challenging to understand why do I see so many of these people first do consulting and then founding? Because it for me, it feels like two opposite worlds almost. So it feels almost like...
Can you give an example of where the opposites are?
And again, maybe I'm now a bit too much cliche, but for me, it's like consulting is just executing the demands of the customer without, to be honest, too much critical reflection. So it's very kind of oriented towards what the customer wants. It's at least how I look at consulting, it's quite like, there are very clear norms and values about what is appropriate behavior, what is not appropriate behavior. Everybody has to work until 10 in the evening. So for me, it's very different from the startup world, where it's all about autonomy, thinking different. So that's why, at least from a distance, it doesn't feel like a straightforward transition.
That's fair. So the way I would describe it is, I would take the startup journey and like absurdly simplify it into two steps. I think the first step is you have to be very critical, very autonomous, very creative, and you have to come up with something that you're going to do. But once you've come up with that, there's also a moment in time where you start, you define the business model, you define the value chains within the company, you define also the culture, right? You define how you want to work together, you define who you want to work with. And then the second step from there is execution, right? Like, you actually have to do it. And I think a lot of startups fail as well because they don't execute well. And I think you see some examples where you have this kind of, if you look at like Gorillas and Flink, for example, right? And you could argue whether Gorillas was actually the one inventing this model, right? They also weren't the one inventing the model. But let's say in Germany they weren't the ones inventing the model. But now Flink is the one that survives. And I always order Flink because I just think that the products and service and so many things are better. And it's like, you guys, I mean, now obviously exaggerating, executing the hell out of this thing without ever having questioned the model. Because they saw this is a good model, it works, let's do it, and let's do it better. Maybe that leads us back to why it was so good for me to study in the US and meeting my co-founder Sasha, because he's a very different, I mean, on many levels we are very similar and we're great friends, but on the other hand, also many things where we are very, very different. And he, I would argue, is much more creative than I am, and I am much more execution focused. And he's also much more much more like almost daring, where I'm more conservative, right? To give an example, like, he bought Bitcoin when it was like still $50, and I don't even own any Bitcoin yet because I'm like, that shit sounds dodgy as fuck. Or we let's say we have a customer meeting, and he'll come out and be like, man, Justus, this is the best business model ever. Like, this is gonna like explode. And I look at him and I'm like, yeah, okay, but have you thought about these 7 problems that we need to solve? Like, this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem. And I think that's where, you have to have these different mindsets. And that's why I mentioned this diversity upside from going to MIT. There was getting together with people that think differently, and then you could put these things together. Yeah. So what I would say with this,
great.
don't invest in a startup that's only WHU founders.
I fully agree with you, because of course I teach the WHU students, and I would say they are amazing in terms of execution capabilities. I've been at a lot of schools, and I say WHU students clearly are top notch in execution. If it's about creativity, then it's a different story, I would say. They are not always the most, I would say, or at least it doesn't come easy to them. Let's say it like that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's maybe talk a bit about the company that you founded.
Sure.
Kadmos, you founded it in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe as a starting point, can you just briefly explain what you're doing with Kadmos?
Yeah, of course. And stop me if I go too far and I just fall into pitching mode, right? Please interrupt. So on a very basic level, Kadmos is an end-to-end salary payments platform for migrant workers. What are migrant workers? Migrant workers are 170 million people in the world. Think about kind of blue-collar, manual labor, technical jobs, where you have a person that actually needs to go somewhere else to do the job. And I think that's the defining characteristic to think about it. We're not talking about these kind of freelance maybe coders, you maybe have some Ukrainian guys working for a San Francisco company. No, we're talking about people that actually have to move for their job. And these people have all kinds of problems. I mean, it's a complicated, hard thing, but also how they get paid. And this topic of how they get paid, that's what we're solving, because what you have to think about, right? You go to a new place, your employer somehow pays you, like in the old ways, there was cash, there was prepaid debit cards, like different kind of ways of paying people. But yeah, the worker doesn't just want to get paid. He actually needs two things. One, he needs to be able to spend money locally where he is. And two, and that's even more importantly, he needs to send money home to his family. Right? That's the reason why you do this kind of stuff, why you go for thousands of kilometers somewhere else and you stay away from your family for so long, because you're trying to provide a better, especially financial future for those people. We solve this in a B2B2C model. We start working with the employers. We integrate with their ERP or accruing systems. They do transfers at regular intervals, bulk transfers. The system automatically distributes this money according to the data that we collect to e-wallets owned by the individual workers. The workers have a mobile app. They can use that to access their e-wallet. They can remit funds to wherever they want, to their family, to their friends, to themselves, and they get a debit card that they can spend where they are. They can shop online and do things like that. And then we do a bunch of other things kind of around this ecosystem. That's roughly what we do.
Okay. And did you focus on a very particular industry at the beginning, or
we're still, to be fair, we found out about a particular industry, and we still also to a large extent do focus on a particular industry. So concretely, right, Sasha and I, we just wanted to work together, right? Like I was at McKinsey. He was doing data science for video game studios, right? And again, I think you can see the difference in our approach to our career. And we were talking about different things, but then he got a call from a relative who actually is himself a so-called seafarer. Seafarer are people that work on ships, right? Different types of ships. You have merchant ships where like you have container and tanker ships, etc. You have cruise ships, right? Those people go on holiday, and you have kind of luxury and yachting segment where you have people that help run like Abramovich's yacht. And he was just chatting with Sasha about some different things, but he also told them about how he and a lot of his colleagues get paid. And there, for the first time, Sasha heard the story of a Filipino guy a couple days earlier going home with tens of thousands of dollars in his pocket, like physical cash. And that's quite a scary proposition, right? Like you go home with pretty much your life savings, and then you travel for like 36 hours to some remote island where your family lives in the Philippines, and you have all this money in your pocket. But to us, excuse me, like to us, it just sounded a bit ridiculous why that's still the case. Did a quick back of the envelope calculation that it's like 50 to 100 billion dollar salaries just in this merchant shipping. I'm not even talking about cruise or luxury of salaries that get paid out, and 20% of that we estimated was still physical cash. So you have 10 to 20 billion dollars that's physical cash, you know, there's a longer story what we did from there, but that's pretty much how we found the problem, and you said, okay, let's go.
Yeah, so you clearly identified the pain point of this Filipino guy, and based on that you realized, okay, there is really a lot of friction going on, and if you have to make international payments as an employee, and that's what we want to solve in the end. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
Yeah, and actually, I think since 2021 you have been growing quite quickly. There was also this Glassdoor top 100 of fastest growing startups, where you guys were in the number 40 or something like that.
Okay.
So that's always nice to hear, not?
That's great. I love it.
You have Series A funding, so you're really on track in that respect. Now, of course, growth also triggers challenges. So what do you see as a kind of the core challenges that you're facing today as a growing firm like Kadmos? What is the most difficult part?
I mean, I would say there's kind of, again, today I have it with the two frameworks, but again, there's like two things to this, right? On the one hand is how do you, excuse me, how do you get even to growth, right? Like that's the bigger challenge, because I mean, growing is what you want to do, right? If you're a startup. So the first challenge, or like many challenges, actually revolve around how do you actually start growing? Like how do you get a product that even people want? How do you find the people to build that the product? How do you finance that? How do you organize that? Like all that's just even starting with the growth. But then once the growth is there, it's like also so many things that then you internally have to take care of. And I think that's what you're probably more asking about.
Yeah.
But by now we are I think 45 people in the team, and that's 22 nationalities. And that's like by design. Like if we really want to stay as diverse as possible. But also you can imagine how, to what extent that makes it also harder to organize internally, right? Because you, I think the most important thing in such an organization is, how do you communicate? How do you understand each other? And I think that's something also where I draw a lot of lessons from, again, this topic we touched upon earlier, this diversity, and also my relation with my co-founder, Sasha, where, he's Ukrainian, I'm German. We do both speak English reasonably well, but it's not our mother language for neither of us, right? So we actually spend a lot of time talking about language, and we both have a bit of an interest in this. So he has like this a translator education he did while he was studying. Like I did a lot of like ancient languages in high school and thought a lot about grammar and these things. And this helps us, but still, the fact that we don't speak the same language allows us to talk about that much more. And actually, I think that actually makes then, once you really work through this challenge, it makes our communication more efficient, right? Yeah. So I think that's something that we also see in the team. Initially, you'll have someone coming in and they are the first person that's from, I'm just going to say a random country, like from Brazil or from Taiwan. And that's obviously cool, but at first it's like, okay, different language, different behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And at first I would say there's like a dip in productivity where you don't understand each other as much. But then when you work through that and you improve your communication, I would say that the communication gets even better than if you would have just started and already would have been on the same communication level. Because then, if you spend some time really thinking about this communication, you become even better. And now I kind of turned your question around that you were asking about challenges. But this, I think, is one challenge that then actually kind of reinforces the good things about the business, where you kind of work through the challenge and then you come out stronger.
And are these people all working in Berlin, or are they mainly working remotely?
All Berlin. I mean,
all Berlin. Okay.
All Berlin. Super happy. We actually had one of our Yegor, who was also a Ukrainian guy, actually a friend of Sasha from his studies, and he was actually in Ukraine until very recently. Because I mean, the situation is clear, and he's finally made Berlin last week. I was very happy to see him. And now we're pretty much complete in Berlin, everyone.
Okay, and that's also kind of because I see also a lot of startups choosing today to have a kind of remote first policy where they say, okay, you can work wherever you are. We are an international company. We don't care. You seem to have a different opinion there.
Yeah, we do have a different opinion. And I think it's also to some extent inspired by the users we serve, right? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, these are people that have to go somewhere to work. And you can argue that being online, being remote is fine. It might work for a lot of companies. I cannot judge that, but for me personally, it's just not the same, and it's also quite boring. And to be honest with you, right when we started, it was the middle of COVID, and
Yeah.
I was bored. I was very bored, and I fucking hated it. And I remember, saying to Sasha in the beginning, if we do a remote company, I'm not doing a company. Like, there's no way.
Okay.
Like, this is
Okay.
just not interesting for me. Because yes, there's many other things that are like hobbies that I can do, things that are interesting. But I think neither you nor I need to work to survive, right? I think if we both just dropped our pencils, dropped our laptop, we would be fed. We would have a place to sleep. Like, it would be no problem. And that's not the reason why I think we work. We work because I mean, you can now draw on many like psychological or sociological models, but we do it for some reason. And if I do it, I want to do it right, and I want to enjoy it. And I think being close to people while you do that just increases that so much. Like, there's so many other things that you have when you're not online. Like, I mean, this sounds weird, but right, you smell people, you touch people, you have you eat the same things, you drink the same things, you experience the same atmosphere, the same weather. There's so many aspects to that, and to me, not having that, I don't know, it takes a lot away from the joy of it.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of, for instance, hiring, because of course you're fast growing, so I suppose you also have to hire on a regular basis new people. Is that something that you take into account when you're hiring people, that they are willing to be in the office?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And often actually it's something, I think it's also it's a divisive point, but it's a point that I think brings together the right people. So, there will be people that say, oh, it's not remote. Okay, no, I don't want to join. But then I'm
Yeah.
also saying, okay, fine, then I think we're not a fit, because I mean, I'm
Yeah.
happy for other people working remotely, remote companies, great, to do it if it works for you, but it doesn't work for us. But then you have people coming into the office. And I remember one example very vividly. Philip, our data protection focused lawyer, he came into the office, and he was working in a very stuffy environment before he came to us, right? I mean, to most other people, no offense, Philip, but data protection law sounds super boring, right? And then that's something, imagine the kind of organization where he used to work, and it was also like a company affiliated with the government,
Yeah.
or institution affiliated with the government, and he came into the office, and like by accident, kind of that day, two people had actually brought their babies to show them off, because they recently had babies, and like you would have to see his face, like sitting in the meeting room with me doing the interview and seeing through the glass door people popping up with babies, and like groups forming, oh, so cute, and like doing this and touching, and and it was such a happy atmosphere, and like he was brimming over both ears, because he was like, man, like, this is the place I want to work at. I want to touch babies. Like, this sounds weird, yeah, but I want to I want to be together with nice people, right? And I think that's something that brings together the people that want the same thing. So I would rather be a bit harsher on enforcing those kind of points. And you mentioned that in the beginning. You were asking, oh, how does it fit together? This consulting execution focused mindset in the startup. But here in the beginning we said, okay, we are not a remote company. Like, I mean, I'm remote right now. I'm right now in my study at home, right? Because I knew that we're going to do this podcast, and I'm doing a bunch of kind of focus things. But 3 or 4 days a week, I always spend in the office, and everyone else does the same thing. And in the beginning, we decided we were not going to be remote. We were going to be on site, and we are. This is a core part of of the way we work, and we keep doing that. Right? We just execute on this, and even though people are like, oh, I want to work in Bali for 3 months, and we're like, no, sorry, then you can't join us. You can't work in Bali for 3 months.
Yeah.
And that's how we do it.
Okay, very interesting that you have such a kind of clear philosophy in that respect. You were talking about lawyers, and of course, you're a kind of fintech company, so I think you're also facing quite some issues in terms of regulation, and at the same time, you're growing quickly. How can you manage that? Because I'm interested. How do you navigate this kind of highly regulatory environment, and at the same time you need to grow quickly? What are the kind of issues that you're facing there?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, yes, right? I mean, that's a big topic. I mean, it's a major topic for us, and that's the reason why by now we already have two full-time lawyers working within the company. We are hiring a third one. And we have, I can't even count the number of external law firms that we work with by now. And So yes, it's definitely something I think about. And if I can give a tip to anyone starting now, if you think you might need a lawyer, you need a lawyer. Like get the lawyer, get them early, both external and internal. Like I think we definitely waited too long. Our general counsel
Okay.
Jasper, who joined us in fall last year, if you would have joined a year earlier, that would have solved a lot of problems.
Okay.
And I mean, but let's maybe get a bit more concrete. You were asking about, we are in a regulated industry. It's a financial technology company. So initially,
Yeah,
right,
and I can imagine that, of course, you're solving a pain point for people that allows them to make transactions international. Of course, there might also be people interested in making international transactions that not for the best reasons. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, of course. And that's actually why right now, I mean, to give you an example, right? I'll make it very concrete. So we used, and I'll go to this point, right? We used or still work a lot with, kind of different providers that help us provide the things that we do, but we also realize we need to do more of this ourselves. So we are also applying for financial licenses ourselves, doing that in the UK as well as in Germany/EU. And to give that example, right, last week we're doing a lot of interviews for a role called MLRO, Money Laundering Reporting Officer, which before I never knew this even existed, because to have such a regulated entity, you suddenly start needing such very specialized talent that do very specific things, like looking at pretty much nothing else, but are people using your platform to launder money? And these are things which I think you only slowly start realizing how important they are. And with all this kind of I guess stereotype of lawyers kind of holding things up and making things slow, like they also enable a lot of things. So that's kind of where my tip earlier comes from. And so that's something like a big topic for us these days, actually, looking at those licenses. We even thought about buying a company in the UK just because they held such a license that we need. In fact, this was an EMI license, or electronic money institution, which is like a small bank. The difference to a bank is that you are not allowed to actually hold the deposits. The deposits need to be with a safeguarding bank. That's one difference, of making it very simple. And the other difference is that you're not allowed to give credit. So you cannot pay or charge interest. But such a license, like we even thought about buying a company. Now this unfortunately, didn't work out for a number of reasons. But this is something which is incredibly relevant to us.
Yeah. And in terms of working with lawyers, because, and I fully appreciate it. So when I have to work with lawyers, sometimes we also have data protection issues and stuff like that. Sometimes it's frustrating, but at the same time, I understand their role. Namely, their role is to minimize risks, not to avoid that you do things that could make you liable in one way or another. At the same time, sometimes that can make making progress more difficult. So you have always this thing like, okay, I understand that the role of a lawyer is to minimize risks, but sometimes I also want to make progress. How do you deal with that kind of tension in your company?
I think first of all, it's good to have tension, right? I think tension is how you get somewhere. You have some thesis, you have an antithesis, and then somehow that comes together, and you find a new path that then actually works, right? I mean, we talked about this tension between execution and creativity in the beginning. I think this is similar. You need kind of the sales-focused people that are like, oh, the customer wants this, let's give it to them. But you also need someone to say, oh, hold up, like, can we actually do this? Can we not only do this once, but can we do this in a scalable manner? Can we do this in a safe and risk minimizing manner? So and to be honest, I think that helps. And then I think the good lawyers and the lawyers that we work with are people that want to make that work, right? And we try to come together, find compromise, and then get somewhere. So actually, I think it's something positive.
Yeah. But you need to have the right type of lawyer, you would say then. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's the right type? That sounds kind of weird. What's the right type of lawyer? I think that's where it comes again to the topic of culture that we talked about in the beginning. That what you are, who you're looking for when you recruit, and what kind of values you look for when you recruit. And one of our values is this, like, very simplified. We call it dare, which is about like just being daring, right? And so also when you have a lawyer and he's supposed to risk minimize, you need to check, will this guy also be able to dare on some things and do things that maybe aren't completely within his comfort zone.
Yeah. Okay. And now, of course, you're working in the financial industry as a kind of fintech. Now, in the past weeks, quite some stuff has happened in the financial industry. You had
Yeah.
Silicon Valley Bank, you had Credit Suisse. Now, is that in one way or another affecting what you guys are doing? Or is this something that is not really having an impact on your activities?
So luckily, it didn't impact us directly in any way, really. Right, but obviously, I think the underlying trend that's happening there is something that affects us in many ways, right? I mean, I think this um, idea now of having these extremely strongly increasing interest rates and that really changing the environment is something which is, I think we don't even, I mean, not that I'm this economic guru, but I would imagine that we're far from knowing the results of this, right? Because you had and I'm going to go really like way more fundamental, but you had the financial crisis, and there was a lot of regulation that tried to make sure that things are safer, right?
Yeah.
But then certain, you'd have this regulation, and whenever you have regulation, you will likely have something else popping up which you didn't know when you were pinning down, because regulation always feels like you're trying to hold this piece, you're trying to hold this piece, you're trying to hold this piece, but something's still going to keep moving, something's going to change, right? In this case, over the last 10 years, you always had like low and decreasing interest rates, and kind of again and again there were reasons to keep them low. Now they're rising, and that's, I think, the thing that actually causes the SVB or the Credit Suisse problems, where at SVB the interest rates rise, and the bonds that they've bought in the low interest rate environment aren't worth what they're used to anymore, and people got panicked. But I also got a bunch of WhatsApps from people saying, "Oh, do you have an account with SVB? Like, I heard some rumors, take your money out." And I mean, it's just this classical bank run situation, but it's caused by something that the regulation maybe at the time wasn't fully foreseeing that this would happen. And for us, to be honest, that's why it's the cool thing about being an entrepreneur and being a startup. Like, this is exactly the situation that are great for us,
Okay.
Because things are like, these other institutions are so rigid, they're so held up, they can't move. And you have a Credit Suisse, like this 100 or 200 whatever years old bank, and they get bought. Like, it's almost like it's sad and ridiculous almost. But for us, this is different. We can be so much nimbler, and I think that's exactly anytime such an upheaval occurs and regulation try to protect old stuffy business. That's exactly where you need entrepreneurs to step in and provide new things that can help you, right? Because imagine, you mentioned this money laundering topic, right? If you are a large institution, it is such a risk to bank certain customers because they will just be too small and it will not make sense because you need to check every single transaction. But for us, these are things that we try to automate. We try to use technology and software to do exactly those things. And technology and software isn't bothered how small their customer is, because it doesn't cost. There's no variable cost. You just keep going, right? And I think that's actually an opportunity for us right now.
Okay, so you guys are applying kind of algorithms to kind of predict whether somebody might be engaged in transactions that should not be accepted, that kind of stuff.
To be honest, I'm the worst one in the company to explain anything about that.
Okay.
I'm literally the least technologically literate person in the entire company, and I'm not proud of that. Like, I'm trying to get better. But yeah, I mean, I think we have some cool stuff going on under the hood.
Great. And maybe just to briefly look back at the past 2 years, because you guys started in 2021 amidst the Corona crisis, have been growing quite intensively in the past 2 years. So if you look back at these 2 years, what would you say has been the most challenging for you personally?
I think for me personally, was sometimes the lack of, how do you say that, the lack of what's the word? Like I didn't know whether what I was doing was the right thing, right? So we talked previously about, like, let's say, the stringency of decisions that I had taken for my career, and I still think that also doing the step with the startup is the most reasonable thing I could have done, right? Where else, with in the beginning I was 25, where else do you get that level of responsibility, opportunities to learn, so much capital to spend on things that just to try yourself out and learn. But what was very different from McKinsey, from the companies like banks and consultancies and private equities where I interned, WHU, MIT, school, like, you at very regular intervals, you get feedback whether what you're doing is the right thing. And you have people that are directly above you looking at you, oh, how are you doing? How should you change? And that was suddenly gone. Right? That was not there anymore. And in the beginning, it's just two idiots, like messing around and trying and seeing what works, right? And you get very little feedback whether what you're doing actually works. And I think, like, psychologically speaking, for me, that was really a shift in mindset I had to make, where I couldn't rely on other people telling me whether what I was doing was the right thing, and I had to spend much more time for myself to think, oh, this what you're doing right now, is this the thing that you should be doing? And I mentioned this in the beginning about this work mindset. If I'm not being productive, then do something else. And I think these are things that go hand in hand. Like, really, you have to be the one that's actually responsible for your own actions. You have to understand whether what you're doing is the right thing or not, which is not always right, but you still have to try.
Yeah. And did you then actually also try to get feedback from other people, or from other founders or people in your company? Or?
Yeah. So I think especially between Sasha and myself, we have a very open feedback culture and try to tell each other like what works and what doesn't work. Because I think one problem with trying to discuss these kind of topics with, like, let's say another founder or someone else, they will not, first of all, know what it actually is that you spend time on. So it's going to take you a long time to explain your issue. And secondly, they are not incentivized to give you good advice, right? So, for example, I'm sure you know a shitload of things about how to be a right entrepreneur, but also you don't care about my success. I mean, you care a little bit, right? You're happy if it goes well, but do you really care? No, right? But between Sasha and myself, for example, and now within much more people within the company who are very dear to us, like, we all really care about the success of the company for many reasons. So I can go and ask someone else in the company, what do you think about my behavior? And they will tell me not what they think I want to hear, not what they want to say because they think it sounds cool. They will tell me what they think is going to make the success of the company more likely. And that's something which I think is very important to think about whenever you try to get feedback, whenever you want to get advice from other people. Like, you need to check what their incentive is. And to be honest, this I learned at WHU, right? Professor Joost's game theory class, to me, is super influential class. Like, thinking about these, like, what incentivizes and motivates other people. And to give you one example of how we're dealing with that right now. Right now, we actually have for the first time a complete 360 review process going on, which when we started it felt way too big. It felt like something, if you're, in the DAX, where you can do 360 review processes with like peers and above and below and this way and that way and spending hours. But now that we're like halfway through, I'm like, this was such a good decision to do this process. Because you spend so much time to reflect on your own strengths and weaknesses, on other people's strengths and weaknesses. And we've already had a bunch of really hard conversations. Like, just yesterday evening, we had a conversation in a group of 4 people, it was really hard to start the conversation. It felt really uncomfortable. But then we were able to speak really openly about someone's kind of problems, but also maybe how we as others contributed to those problems. I think we solved it really well. We found a really cool ideas to change it. And we went out of the meeting, I think, being a much stronger team because we were honest, we were open, we were vulnerable. We talked about things, and we went out feeling actually really good about it. So I think it's a great question that you asked, right? And like going from this, what was this challenge saying? Okay, I think the challenge was this idea of like getting this feedback, and now how do we implement that? And I think that again connects with the beginning where we said you have to be creative and you have to learn new things and be critical or whatever. But then, you realize what culture truth or what culture piece you realize from that, and then executing that in the company, now having this institutionalized review process, which really helps us grow. So, really cool question. It really helped me to also think through that. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, and again, I don't want to go too deep, but can you give me an example of something, a behavior that you have changed based on that feedback?
I think one concrete thing, for example, is the way I communicate, and concretely, when I think about concretely, I think it is about giving people the full spectrum of things that are relevant, like both positive and negative things. Because for me, when I think about the company, I typically focus on the problems that are there. How can I solve these problems? Because all day, like, I think about the strategy and the high level view on these topics. But then if I go into a conversation with someone who maybe is a recent joiner or is a person that is maybe in the engineering team and spends all day improving data structures, right? They don't think about that level. And then if I come in and tell them about all the problems that are there, he will get demotivated or she will get demotivated. But I say this because I already know all the things that are working well. I'm like, yeah, fine, these things already work, like fine. But then going in, I think you have to make sure that you are balanced about your communication, and because people really rely on these things that you know as a founder that are the great things why you're doing this. Like, why have I been spending more than 2 years of my life on this, doing so much stuff? Because I believe it's such a cool thing to do. And like reminding ourselves that that's an absolute fact and celebrating this and being happy about that, it just also makes the whole thing so much more enjoyable, right? Because even if it's a challenge, then you know you're working on this, you're solving this challenge because you really believe that this is what you should be doing. And I think that's a big learning from that, and I think something that really made me grow as someone leading groups of people in whatever fashion.
Yeah, so that you should not only focus in your communication and behavior on the problems or the negative side, but also highlight the successes, the positive side. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Clear.
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually quite recognizable. I think you're not the only one facing that kind of challenges. Great. What we always do at the end of the podcast is simply to ask what you're reading, what you're listening to, what movies you're watching. Do you have, for our audience, any specific recommendations of books, podcasts, movies that inspire you? And it doesn't have to be business related. It can also be in a totally different direction.
Yeah. I think there are 2 books the only ones I can really recommend when someone asks me about book recommendations, because those I've read and reread so many times. And one is this novel from Jules Verne, in 80 Days Around the World.
Okay.
Like the first time I ever read this, I didn't read it. It was an audiobook that for some reason was lying around in our house, and I read it. And what I love about it is, and I don't want to spoil it, right? But you have this guy, Phileas Fogg, the main character, who doesn't need anything, right? Like he's at home in London. He has a shitload of money. He has, a life that works really well. But suddenly his club colleagues come up with this challenge of going around the world, and he's like, yeah, I'm just going to do it. And he does it for a reason that's never really revealed in the book, and that's not a spoiler, but things happen. I'm not going to say if he makes it or whatnot, but there are so many things which he positively gains from having started it. And I think that's something which is a huge learning for me, but also it's just amazing to read. If you don't like reading, listen to the audiobook, but if you're German, listen to the audiobook narrated by Rufus Beck. Don't listen to any other audiobooks, because that's the one that's narrated in the coolest way. That's book tip number 1. And book tip number 2, it's not all too different. It's this book called Die Data by Hermann Hesse. It's a bit of this kind of almost a coming of age story, and a little bit of a certain spiritual and seeker type aspect to it. But that one I can just really recommend for anyone that's struggling to figure out what exactly they want to do. And especially during COVID times for me, where I mentioned in the beginning I was severely bored, and I think this boredom is for me personally it's a big word, maybe bigger than other people use it, and that book really helped me to think about that. So those are the 2 I can really recommend.
Okay, great. Yeah, so quite 2, I would say, creative suggestions that we
have
not
maybe
heard
then
before.
I'm not that uncreative as you accused me.
Yeah, your execution focus, it's true. Yeah, it's execution focus. Yes. Justus, thanks a lot for this conversation. I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. Nice that we went into kind of some different topics that I did not anticipate. That's always nice. So thanks a lot for doing this, and I hope you also enjoyed the conversation.
I really did. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julius.
Thank you.
So everybody, thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a rating wherever you listen or watch this podcast. You can also follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date with our latest episodes. We appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.